All right, let's go ahead and get started. My name's Jamie Cool. I'm a group program manager in the Team Foundation server team. And I got a pretty easy talk for you. At least it's going to be an easy talk as long as my voice lasts through the session, which is no given. We're going to be talking about all of the things that we've done and are doing in TFS and Visual Studio around developer productivity. So if you're a dev, if you use TFS and Visual Studio, this is the talk for you. If you're a dev and you're interested in using TFS and Visual Studio, this is the talk for you. If any of those aren't true, you're welcome to stay, and maybe you'll be interested by the end. That's what the talk's going to be about. Let me level set a little bit. Let me see a show of hands. How many people are using the 2012 version of TFS and Visual Studio today? All right, so I'm going to go with about half. Now, what I'm going to show you today is going to be a mix of things. So if you're using it today, you're going to probably see a few things that you already know about. But I'm also going to mix in some other stuff that is coming pretty soon and give you some hints about some of the other things we're doing in the future. We have a more rapid delivery cadence that we're working under right now, and I'll give you that map at the end, kind of show you a bunch of stuff, and then tell you of everything I showed you, what's where. So in terms of the agenda for the talk, I have about 3 slides, and for the most part, we're just going to do demos. I'm just going to show you all the different stuff that's going on, and that's the talk. So let's just go ahead and jump into it. So our one slide before we jump into the demos. So in the 2012 release and continuing forward, we've had a number of themes that we've been trying to do throughout the product. One is this friction-free, meaning you're a dev, you're trying to create an application, you're not trying to use a tool, you want the tool to help you do your job, you don't want the tool to get in your way. And there's a bunch of things we've been doing to try to get the tools out of the way where they may be and do things where the tool actually helps you more than it already does. That's kind of been a major theme, and you'll see that as we go through. Another one's been around collaboration. TFS in particular has always been a tool for helping teams work together. We talk about the entire development team, but really we've been focused a lot on the developers themselves, right? The developers collaborating together, because developers collaborate together all the time, even if we're not talking about instant messaging, like, hey, I need to get a code review of my code. I need to merge my code with another developer's code. Those are all forms of collaboration, and you'll see them as we go through. And the last one's cross-platform and breadth, because another show of hands, how many people work in a company that only builds things on the Microsoft platform today? Okay, I love you guys. Everybody else, you're kind of in my doghouse, but the reality is that more and more companies are very, very broad. You may do a bunch of development for Microsoft platforms over here, but there's a reasonable chance you got an iOS team over here doing its own development, or a Java team, and you still want those teams to all be work together, and that's another major theme that we'll see in different places throughout. Okay, so enough slides. Let's just do demos. All right, so conference network permitting. We're going to do everything today against the hosted service that we just RTM'd yesterday. So RTM'd means we moved it out of preview. It's now in its final domain, and it's ready for real people to go use. And we've got our real teams inside of Microsoft using it. So we're going to do it against my hosted TFS account, which is cool.visualstudio.com. Sorry, guys, that one's already gone. I would say now's your chance to go get the domain you want, right? When we just switched over to Visual Studio domain, so a year from now you're going to be, it's like picking a new Hotmail or Google or Gmail account, right? You're adding numbers and symbols to it. So we're going to do everything against that, and we're going to do it against this Cool Scrum V2 project. But we're going to spend 99% of our time in Visual Studio, because that's where developers spend 99% of their time in Visual Studio. So if you haven't seen it yet, the new 2012 version of Visual Studio has a new Team Explorer in it. And I'm going to talk a little bit about this quick. We built a new version of Team Explorer because we had a couple goals. One, we wanted it to be more than just navigation the way the one was before. We wanted it to be more actionable, able to actually work inside of it, as opposed to always being redirected. And the other 2 goals were, one, we have this tool window problem in Visual Studio. Like there's, I don't know, 8,763 last time I stopped the count, or something close to that. So we wanted to try and not create as many tool windows. And then we also wanted to get rid of modal dialogues. People generally hate modal dialogues. I mean, I can literally think of experiences where we have like 3 stacks of modal dialogues on top of each other. But to get rid of modal dialogues, you need a model and a place to go put those. So those are the problems that Team Explorer was fixing. So I'm going to give you a quick one down through this real quick. Really, it's focused around a set of hubs. So we have a set of hubs here, like your work items. You can go into work items and see all of your queries and stuff that you're used to as part of it. But you can also, we've also tried to make favorites actually interesting. You can go in and builds are the same way. This is my build hub as the developer. These are the set of builds that I was running through an hour ago when I was walking through the demos that all get kicked off as part of it. So these are my builds that I care about. I can click through them. My favorite builds, all the builds that I use down here that I can search. We've tried to put filtering everywhere that we could. So this is kind of the model we were trying to go with Team Explorer, making each page more useful. We added search as part of it, so I can search for things like product. I can search for things like bugs that are assigned to me, and which there are a lot in this particular one, and open them up. We also use the preview pane. If you haven't experienced that feature of 2012, that's the single biggest reason to upgrade, in my opinion. You'll see how, as I'm clicking through here and opening up different work items, I'm not spamming myself with tabs. My favorite feature, and we use that as much as we can in Team Explorer. Now I can pop it out and pin it if I actually want to have a bunch of bugs open, but that's the type of thing that we were doing with Team Explorer. Now, we also moved pending changes into Team Explorer. So let me show you that real quick. So I've got pending changes, which isn't interesting unless we actually have a change. So let's just go to a random app here and make a change. And you can see that change shows up, but it's not really interesting unless we have a bunch of changes. So let's refactor this guy. And you can see that I have a bunch of changes. We have it's a tree view now, so you can collapse and expand it and filter this. If you want to filter it down to only show particular files, you can do that. Now we also made some interesting changes as we were going through this. So the checkboxes are gone. So if you want to not only want to check in one file, you can move them down into this excluded section, and then take this file and only set that to check in, which is kind of nice. One of the things that's nice about include exclude is that if you have things like a web config file, right, where it needs to be checked in, but you need a local version of it that's different than the one that you're actually checking in, you can have it pinned in the excluded section and just have it permanently changed without having to remember not to accidentally check it in. Now, we made a bunch of these changes, and we've got a bunch of good usability feedback as part of this. Some we knew about, some are kind of new learnings for us, and I want to talk a little bit about some of the changes that are upcoming in Team Explorer and the pending changes stuff. So the first is, there's advantages to this exclude section in that it can be sticky, which is nice, but there was a nice elegance of just having a little checkbox there where you could one click select ones that you were going to check in and check out. So we're going to bring back a single click metaphor for including and excluding files, so it's more along those lines of what people want. The other interesting thing is that some people actually absolutely love the tree view, right? It helps you kind of organize and see your files. Some people love the list view, and there's a different advantages to both. It's kind of like diff, right? Like, do you like inline diff or do you like side-by-side diff? And I could take a survey here and I'd get some different proportion of answers, but I'm pretty sure there's no right answer, but if you care, you really care. So we're going to be bringing back a list view as well. So you have the option of using a list or a tree as part of this. Other things that we've heard are, one of the things we've been trying to do with Team Explorer is to get rid of tool windows, right? Like not have 18 tool windows do what one could do, which works great in a lot of situations. But the more you combine it in, that means the more you're navigating around, right? Like if I'm in pending changes and I want to go to work items, and if I'm switching back and forth, it can be a little bit more cumbersome than you want. So we're going to make it so that you can actually take a page out of this and pin it. So if you always want to have pending changes around, you can have pending changes around. If you always want to have builds around, you can always have builds around. That one's going to take us a little longer, but that's also in the pipe for this. Another thing that has largely gone over well, but does cause problems for some set of folks, is that you see here, everything I'm doing is in the Cool Scrum V2 project, right? Everything is rooted at this one project, because most of our users, they work in one project all the time. And it works great, and that's the case. But the reality is that a lot of people use team projects differently. You know, like you may have one huge team project, you may have an org where you've got 50 team projects, and if you switch them all the time, then this becomes a little more cumbersome. So we're going to make it easier to switch between team projects for folks that have a bunch of them as well. So there's a bunch of those types of usability stuff, and in fact, I've got somewhere in the audience one of my usability guys right there. So if any of you guys are interested in more directly participating and giving us feedback on not just this, but anything in the TFS and broader Visual Studio space in terms of direct usability stuff, he's your guy. He'll be up here afterwards, and just hook up with him, and then he'll get you plugged in to get a more direct opportunity to do that. Okay, so that is Team Explorer real quick. Now, let's go ahead and undo all these changes. Let's just do one more thing, just for the heck of it. We have one change here. We're going to check it in, just to make the point. We've tried to make everything as async as possible. So right now, this isn't blocking Visual Studio at all while it's doing it. We couldn't make everything asynchronous, but we made what we could asynchronous. We also tried to get rid of modal dialogues where we could. So before, like viewing change sets, viewing shelf sets, you could really get stacked up in modal dialogues. Like take shelf sets, for example. If you wanted to view the contents of a file of a shelf set, it would be Visual Studio with the find shelf set modal dialog, with the shelf set details modal dialog, with another instance of Visual Studio with the file open, right? Same things with change sets. So if we were to go and look at a shelf set, for example, I can go here and let's filter down to a shelf set and open it up. I can see the details of the shelf set right here, and I can go through and just look at the actual changes that are in that specific shelf set without having to have any modal dialogues involved in the process. And change sets work in a very similar manner. Now, if you haven't seen it before, your eyes are probably glued on the left to figure out what's going on with all these colors and visuals in the editor over there. So that's the new inline diff tool that's in Visual Studio 2012. And it's actually really good because, honestly, when you're building a diff tool, it's like 80% the editor and 20% the diff experience. And we have a pretty good editor here with Visual Studio. So the most interesting way to use it is actually not off of a shelf set, but off of something that's editable. So, I've got this file here that we can just keep changing, and let's change something here, and maybe, I don't know, delete this. And then if we do a compare against this, and let me shrink this down a little bit, you can see that, I'm getting that compare that I just did of all the things I changed, including going down to the word level. You can go from side-by-side to inline view, which is right here, and go back and forth. Now, I kind of like side-by-side view better. But the best thing about this is it's the live editor, right? So not only can I type and get diff as I'm typing, but I can do all of the stuff that you would expect, while I'm doing it, because it is actually just, the full editor experience in Visual Studio. So new diff tool is great. Now, you can't talk about diff without talking about merge. Merge is one of those things that we also wanted to go make better. Now, we did two things to try to make merge better. One is we have a new merge tool, which replaces the one that was built for Visual Source Safe about 20 years ago. No, guys, it's not a joke. I'm totally serious, right? Like, they wrote it for Visual Source Safe 20 years ago, and we used it. So we replaced that. I'll show you that in a minute. But we also went through and we tried to get rid of all the conflicts that we know of, that if there was any case we were generating unnecessary conflicts where we could be smarter, we did that. The other thing we did is, it's becoming a more common practice that if you have changes that are auto-mergeable, just go ahead and merge them. And that's what we do now. It's configurable. You can turn it off. But if you get conflicts, and we can auto merge, we'll do that. Which means if you're doing a get and you got incoming changes, there's 3 files that conflict, and we can auto merge them. You won't even know there's a conflict. I mean, we'll spit it in the output, but we'll just take care of it. You won't have that merge experience come up. If you get 100 conflicts, but 97 of them are auto mergeable, you only see the last 3. So again, because I think all of us we die a little bit inside every time we see that merge experience come up. So we were trying to kill you slower than we were killing you before. So let's go look at that. So we're going to work on this little simple JavaScript class, and we'll call it super duper math as our amazingly great change to this file. Now, in order to do a conflict demo, we need a bad guy, and the bad guy is defined by the guy creating the conflict that's creating work for me. So playing the role of our bad guy this go round will be this guy. So he's working on the same file, except he's using Eclipse, using our Team Explorer Everywhere plugin to Eclipse, talking to our hosted service. All right. So he's going to come down here and he's going to start changing something. He's going to come down to the multiply section, and maybe he's going to do z equals x times y, and then return z, and we'll come over here and we'll commit it and say, this is how a real dev does it, and check it in. And there we go. Now we'll come back over to the good guy. And the good guy here is just, coding away. He's ready to check in his awesome change. So he's going to do a get latest to make sure he's in good shape. So pay attention to the multiply method down there. Except when that pops up. And you see that right there, the changes came through, except we have our nice little tab and space problem in this particular case. I read something a couple years ago on this topic. It was, the best dev interview question in the world is tabs versus spaces. And the point of it is the answer doesn't matter, but they should care, and care a lot. So I don't know if it's actually a good interview question or if it's just saying something about devs or what, but I thought it was interesting. All right, so we auto-merged. If we look at the output, it'll actually say that we automatically resolved that conflict for that project. But for me just using it, it was great. It just worked. So let's do something a little bit more interesting. Let's go here and change the add method to subtract in this case, and then we'll go back to our bad guy. And this guy thinks that it should be divide. And we'll check that in. What's that? Did I change the wrong method? What? Oh, thank you. All right. I appreciate it. We'll just change both for the heck of it. And we'll check that in. And then we'll go back over to the good guy. And this time, we'll do get latest. And of course, it's not going to just auto-merge this because we can't literally auto-merge the same character change. But now we're going to launch the merge tool. And the merge tool works a lot better on a real resolution, but we'll just kind of pull it out. And you can see here that what this is doing is it's giving me left, right, and result at the bottom, right? And some people like this layout, which is the default. I kind of like this layout where it's left, right, and result in the middle. You can do whatever you want. But essentially the way this works is you see it already checked x divided by y down here in the subtract method because that one's auto-mergeable, right? There's no conflict with the other file. But here now I have to make a choice of which one I want to take. So I could take left, and that'll change the bottom, and I'm good to go. I could decide, no, I want to take right, and then I'm good to go. I could check both, and then I can come down and start actually writing the code to resolve it, because sometimes you got to literally do that to resolve conflicts. But the nice thing about this is that, again, it's still just the editor, and the full experience is part of doing that merge itself. So I'll just leave this random bad code in there, and I'll accept the merge. And then let's go ahead and go to our pending changes and see, we're going to check in. Let's undo that change we were messing with before. And we will check this guy in. Now, I got this checked in, and then I realized that pretty much all of these changes we just made were terrible. I can go into the change set that I just checked in, and I can see it, and I can look at the diff of what I checked in, and I can actually go and roll back that change set if I want to. Except really, just this change set wasn't the only bad one, right? Like all the ones we just did in this demo were terrible. The class was better before we started. So let's go back to the history, and we were doing some set of changes. So I'll just pick to take all of those change sets we just created, roll back those. I can customize the set of change sets I'm actually rolling back. This one's going to configure to get the ones we just did. Get a rollback for that. It will calculate what it takes to undo those set of changes. And then if we go into our pending changes, we'll see that it's marked as a rollback. And if I open the file, it's the original file that we have. And if we look at what it's doing, it's basically going through and undoing all of the stuff that we just messed up as part of it. And then we can fix it, and I have undone all of those changes that we just messed up. Okay. Oh, you guys like this, then you're going to love the next stuff. How many people have ever tried to work on their code while they were disconnected with the network while using TFS? What is wrong with you guys? I mean, seriously. We have an offline mode, so you're good, right? We have this feature in TFS today called server workspaces. And they're called server workspaces because while you keep a copy of your code locally on the client, we track on the server all of the changes that you've made locally, right? So we know what you're doing to it. Now, this may sound weird, but there's a really good reason why we do this. We do this because if you have a very large workspace, say hundreds of thousands of files or millions of files, which may sound crazy, but is common inside of Microsoft, then the time that it takes to calculate what you need to do a get latest operation for example, can take a very long time. Whereas if we track it on the server, it's going to be fast. So that's why we do it. Now, the downside is anytime you try to change something locally, we have to go back to the server to let the server know what's going on, and you get the offline problem. So we have introduced a new feature in 2012 called local workspaces. And the way local workspaces work is pretty much the opposite of what I just described, which is you have a copy of your files locally, and we track all that stuff locally, and we don't go back to the server unless we absolutely have to go back to the server for an operation. And even when we go back to the server, it will be asynchronous. So let me show you what I mean, and we'll go in a little more detail here. So first off, we've got this great new feature called local workspaces, but I still occasionally hear from people that are using 2012 that they're having the same offline problems. And the problem is always the same. They're still using server workspaces. So if you are working with a set of files that's less than 100,000, which I'm guessing is almost everyone here, my strong advice would be use local workspaces. If you get above 100,000 files, then the time it will take to do other operations, like doing that get latest calculation I mentioned, will start to slow down, and you'll pay a trade-off as part of it. And it's just kind of a fundamental trade-off between the two different models. So if you upgrade your server, so if you create a new workspace on 2012, you'll get local workspaces, just default. You don't have to think if you're greenfield. If you got an existing one that you're upgraded, then your workspace, when you first go to pending changes, will look something like this, where we're saying, hey, do you want to upgrade to local workspaces? Click yes. And that will convert this to a local workspace, and it's pretty quick. It can take a little longer, depending on how many files you got, but it's still not going to take hours. So make sure you do that, and then you'll get all the stuff that I'm about to show you. So we're going to go back to our main workspace here. So the first feature of local workspaces is offline, obviously. So we have a little pinger going here, and this is kind of the state of the conference network, so it's already a bit bad. I can't say this is filling me with confidence here. I'm going to pull out the network cable, though. All right, so I am offline. You can see I'm totally offline. There's no connection, no wireless. So if we go back into Visual Studio, you see that what I want to do, I want to start editing files. So I'm going to open this file, and you're going to have to watch. Okay, so you're going to watch. I'm going to hit the key, and then you're going to watch over on the right. The account controllers is going to get a little glyph, which says it's checked out. And there was no pause at all. It just did it because there's no network activity associated with any of these types of operations. So if you just want to keep coding while you're offline, it's no big deal. You can just keep going. You're not impacted. You can make changes left and right. And then we also let you do a few more things while you're offline because we keep a cached copy of the latest version of the file since you last went down. You can do things like do a compare. So I can do that compare and see the changes I just made since I last did a get. Yeah, if I want to go back and roll back to where I was before, I can come in here and undo, and then go back to the raw state before I made those changes. So you can do a nice set of things offline. Now, you can't do everything. Like if you go back to Team Explorer, you'll see that, hey, check-in's disabled. So check-in is what sends it back to the server. We can't get to the server now. We're not going to let you do that. Related work items, where you want to associate work items also aren't local, so you can't do that. But you can do things like, if you wanted, like, so if I did a view history, for example, again, I can't go. You also know that no, like, modal progress blocking dialog or experience came back up, even though we tried to go to the server. So we went through all the stuff we had in Visual Studio and tried to fix that. So I'm going to plug back in our network cable here, and we will hope that it comes back. All right, so we are back online, I hope. So we'll just go back here and refresh real quick. And now that I'm back online, you see the check-in box is re-enabled, and I can do a check-in of changes made offline. And there we go. All right, so the offline problem solved. Now, there was another problem with server workspaces, which is, occasionally I hear from customers that are obviously confused in some form or another, that because they're trying to use a tool besides Visual Studio. Like, they're not just doing all their edits through Visual Studio, they're doing something else for some reason. I don't know why, but they are. And they're hitting this problem that all the files had read-only bits on them, right? And the reason that they had read-only bits on them is that we didn't want you changing it outside of Visual Studio, because then we weren't going back to the server and keeping the workspace information up to date, which is kind of a problem. But those read-only bits were a big problem. So those are all gone. No read-only bits anymore, and they'll never come back. And if you want to use a different tool for some other reason, like let's use our favorite tool, Notepad. And so we'll open up this thing on the file system, and we will drag a file onto it. How about our web config file? Okay, except I dragged over Solution Explorer. That's not good mojo. All right, there we go. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a character here in A. Everybody watch over impending changes when I do this. Okay, well, I'm going to hit save. Okay, there we go. Now it showed up. I have to admit, I was worried there for a split second. Now I'm going to hit Control-Z and hit save again. And it disappears. We picked that up as well. So if you just change things off the file system, we'll pick them up. You can check them in through Visual Studio or the command line. New files work in kind of almost the same way, because if you're editing a file already under source control, we know you want the change picked up. If you're just adding a new file, it's not so clear, right? Like if you generate like a binary file, you don't want to check that in probably. So adds and deletes work a little bit differently. Like if we add a new text document here, you'll see that it didn't pick it up. But if we go down to the excluded changes, you'll see that there's one detected add. And I can go in here and I can see that. And if I want to promote it as an add, I can do that. If you rename it, we'll detect all of those types of things as well. But like, let's say that you're working on some project that has some new type of intermediate file that we don't know about. You can actually set up rules by coming in here and setting up ignore rules. And what these will do is these will go into a .tf ignore file. And the TF ignore file will basically say, at this location in the source control repo down, here are the rules for what types of files to pick up and not. So if I never want to pick up text files, for example, you can take that, and then you'll see there's a TF ignore file that's part of it, and there's a bunch of examples in here, and you can see it added text, as don't pick that up. And you can put whatever exclusion types of syntax in there that you want. So that's local workspaces, a good change. Now, the most common question that I get after I show people local workspaces is often, okay, this is great. Talk to me about DVCS, right? Now, for those of you that don't know what DVCS is, it stands for Distributed Version Control System. So there's two main models for version control systems right now. There's TFS, which is a centralized version control system, which means that there's a master server where that's the truth, that is where all of your code goes. That's how you think of using TFS. So distributed version control systems are different. There's no absolute master, and you basically have a version control repo that you can move down to each of your client machines. And that means you have the full VC repo locally on your client box, which means if you want to do things like view history or check in offline, you can do all of those things locally and then work back up. So there's lots of trade-offs between centralized and DVCS-based solutions. But there are definitely some advantages in this offline conversation that we have. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the work we've been doing in this space. So let me switch over to our slides, and we'll go to our second slide of the talk. And when you see this, you'll know why we're not having too many slides. So, okay, we have this new tool called GitTF. And what that lets you do is use Git and TFS together. Now, what's Git? Git is the most popular implementation of a DVCS system that exists today, which is why we picked it. And what it lets you do is you can use it locally. And it enables kind of two scenarios. One scenario is, you know what, I've got a team, my organization, and they're all using TFS, because this is where we keep our build, this is what we do our builds out of, this is where we want the master copy of all of our source for backup, this is where we have our work items and our process. But, you know, I want to use Git because I know Git, and, you know, I want to be able to work offline and branch locally and do all of those kind of more advanced operations. You can go do that, use Git locally, and still share your changes back on TFS. So that's scenario number one. So it's kind of like this local workspace thing I was showing you, plus plus. The other scenario that's interesting in more of the heterogeneous side of things is, you know, my team and my organization is using TFS, but I got, you know, these iOS guys, for example, and they're using Xcode on the Mac to build an iOS thing, and they want to use Git because that's the preferred VC system if you're building an iOS app. But I still want them to be part of my team. I still want them to be in the central TFS repo, sharing the work items, all that kind of stuff. This scenario also lets you do that. So the way this diagram on the right is describing is that you got your shared TFS repo that everybody uses, and then down there on the bottom you got your client, which is where you have your Git repo, and then any Git-enabled tool can talk to that, and then you can use Git TF to share those changes back and forth between TFS and Git, and I'll show you that right now. So we're gonna pick the second scenario of those two that I listed. So we're gonna use our Mac for this. All right. So I have an empty folder here, my Git source folder. And actually, you know what? Before I do that, let me show you on the PC what we're gonna do. So we've got in our project, we have, you know, a bunch of folders, and one of them is this iOS folder, and it's got a couple of apps in it. So basically, you know, I have my small iOS team. My iOS team, they've been putting their stuff into TFS. Now I'm a new dev on the team, and I want to start getting it. I want to start using it too. So how do I actually use the stuff out of this? So that's what we're going to do. So we're gonna use a couple of tools. We'll start with the most basic, which is the terminal. And normally, if this was stored in a Git repo, for those of you that know Git, I would come in here and do a Git clone. And basically, Git clone is the equivalent of a Get latest, except it'll not just get the latest version of your code, it'll also get all the history and change sets associated with it. But instead of doing Git clone, we're gonna do Git TF clone, all right? And then we're gonna pick where we wanna get it from. And we're gonna get it from our Visual Studio account, and because we just changed domains yesterday, there's a bug where I got to put default collection in the URL, unfortunately. And then I'm gonna now. The nice thing about this is that you know, because distributed version control systems, you move the entire repo locally on your client. You typically want to keep those repos smaller than you do with centralized repos, because you don't want to be sucking down like a huge one. Like if I tried to pull down my entire TFS repo out of DevDiv right now, it would take, I can't even imagine how long. So what I can do now is I can pick the subset of TFS that I want locally on my box to use here, and that's what I'm going to do. So we said we were in the Cool Scrum V2 project, and then it was in the iOS folder, and then the app was simple iOS. Now, by default, what this is going to do is it's going to pull down the tip, the latest version of all of the code at that location, and create a local Git repo for me. But I'm going to put one more option on here, which is deep, and that says not only copy down the tip, but copy down all of the change sets associated with that part of the repo as well. So I also have a log of my history local as part of it. So we'll hit that, and it's going to prompt me for credentials. So on the hosted service, so all these different tools use different auth mechanisms. Like if I was doing the same scenario over here on-premise on a Windows box, it'd be using Windows auth and everything would just work. Now against the hosted service, we use live ID, federated identities. And federated identities don't work in a lot of tools. You have to have them plumbed in. It does in Visual Studio, it doesn't in the Mac terminal window that we're doing here. So I need a different set of credentials. So we've added a new feature to the hosted service and to TFS in general, which is basic credentials. So each user has a set of basic credentials they can use for accessing the service. So if you want to get those, you can go over to Team Foundation Server, and then go to your profile, and then go down, grab your credentials, and you can see here my username, my password, and I can go change what that password is. And it basically is this for enabling some of these more heterogeneous scenarios. We're using different clients, but I'll just put those in. And now we'll go through the process of cloning everything down. And earlier today, when I was on a normal network, this didn't take very long. There we go. So it cloned it all down. If I look inside of this directory, there's a simple iOS directory. I can go in there, and I can do a git log, which again, if you're familiar with git, this is the equivalent of a history command. And you can see that I have all of those changes. You know, I can see the actual history of the change sets. This is the same history if I go over, and we'll do this in a minute, if I go over to TFS, I'd see the same history. If we go back to our Finder, you'll see that there is the project that just got cloned down. It's an Xcode project. We can open this guy up in Xcode, and we'll just make, you know, a really simple change. So I can click the right way. There we go. And let's just go down there and put a little change in there so we know what's going on. All right, so now I'm going to save this, and I'm going to commit this. This is just using Xcode now against Git. And we will commit this. So I'm committing this change of adding hello right there, so remember that. And I'll commit it. So I can keep working. I can work if I'm an iOS guy or just a guy that wants to use Git like I would any normal way. And now when it's time for me to want to share my changes with the rest of the team, the rest of the world, that's when I would go back to Git TF, and I would just do Git TF check-in. And again, and those will push those changes back up to TFS. If we go back to TFS, and we go down here, and I look at our history, you can see these are the changes that we were seeing in that Git log, and you can see right there is the hello world change set that we just pushed. And we can open it up. There's our comment. There's the file. There's the actual exact change that we just made as part of it. So this is kind of one of our first steps into the DVCS space. It won't be our last. So that's that. Now, what do we want to do? Okay, another kind of new small rock that's coming. Has anybody ever had any problem because they're working on projects that are involved enough that they run out of character paths? You know, like you get down to 260 characters and you can't go any further? Yeah, some people. Yeah, we hear this a lot, especially from folks from particular countries that tend to have longer strings than others. So I'd like to come up here and tell you that all of those problems under the sun are eliminated, and you can have as deep a path for anything as you want. And you know, I can't tell you that. I can tell you that we made the first step on it. So you still have the same restrictions on the client, and that you can only have 260 characters because there's a bunch of things plumbed in with that. But we fixed the TFS side of things, so you can have a deeper hierarchy for that. So let me show you that. So I'm going to go down here to a new project called Large Project. And we are going, it is a very, very deep project. And we are going to open this up. And if you guys think this is tedious watching me open this up, you should have watched me create it. Especially the third time I realized I screwed up my calculations. All right, so we're down to 240 because the max folder length is actually 240, but you can go to 260 with the file length. So there you go. There's a tree structure that's 260. And I'll prove this to you in a minute. But I have a really, 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 really deep tree. Now I'd like to branch it. So I'm going to come up here, and I am going to branch. So because a common example is I have this really deep tree that I can work with that deep tree locally. But on the server, I want to organize this because I want this in my shared repo where I'm organizing stuff from a bunch of different teams, or I want a bunch of different branches for this stuff. And I only ever sync down, the devs only ever sync down that part of it. So this works just fine. But you were limited on the server by the same 260 constraints. So now on the server side, you can organize it however you want, up to 400 characters, so that you can have as deep a branches or as deep a structure and organization as you want, and devs can still work with a subset that they want. So if we go here and we say, I'm going to branch this thing down into this very large branch organization set of folders, and give it, our build demo branch. Just some more characters, just for the heck of it. And branch this. It will, in fact, branch it. And if we go here, there it is. And to prove it, you're going to have to watch me expand all this stuff out one more time. And I'm just thankful that I think this is the last time I'm going to be doing it. Okay, there we go. And then up here we have our really long path to the whole thing that we are going to just select it all. And then we will go into Word, put this in here, select this, characters, 314 characters. So we have broken the 260 character path limit. It's like breaking the sound barrier or something, right? Is that overstated? You're welcome. Okay, so there's a nice little rock for you. So let's keep going. We got 18 minutes and lots of stuff. So I'm going to show you some of the My Work stuff real quick for those of you that haven't seen it. So let me close all these and go to okay, so level set a little bit. So we're back here at our TFS portal. And I'm going to go to my team's backlog and go to my board. So you can see this is our board. We've got 5 items. They're all assigned to me in this case to keep it real simple. Now this is great, except I'm a dev. I don't really want to go and mess with the task board and keep things up to date. I live in Visual Studio. So my work is essentially in Visual Studio version of this. So there's your task list. And you can customize it. You can add to it. You can use a custom query if you want. It can be what you want. But by default, it's mapped to your Agile tooling. So I'm a dev. And my job right now is to go implement search. And I'm going to, let me just clear out some state here. Get rid of the changes. There we go. Okay. So my job is to implement search. So I'm going to start this and move it up here and say, you know what? I'm working on search. Now you may ask yourself, why as a dev would I ever do this as opposed to waiting to the very last moment to associate this work item with this check-in? It's a good question. One motivation would be that now after you did that and you come here, that moved over. So now your team knows what you're doing, and more specifically, your Scrum Master isn't going to be in your door right before your Scrum meeting every day. So I'm working on implement search. Great. Let's go and write some code for this. So I'll come in here and let's just start changing some things. So this is an MVC app, so I'm going to need a search controller, and we'll put in our great implementation. Maybe I'll put a breakpoint in there, and I'm coding away. I'm happy. Then my boss comes in and says, you know what? It turns out implementing search isn't the priority. Our site's not pretty enough. I need you to spend some time, updating the site's look and feel, which was also here. So I got interrupted, but I wasn't done. So normally now I start having to juggle changes in files and shelving and unshelving and all this kind of stuff. Now all I got to do is click suspend. And that'll basically bundle up all of that stuff for you, so you don't have to think about it. It's still using shelf sets, using all that same technology. So I'm just going to say implement search, and I can, put in whatever comment I need to remind me, and suspend it, and it'll clean up my workspace. So you watch over here, it'll put me back to a clean state. Those changes have been set aside for me. So now I can start working on improving the site's look and feel. So we'll go start working on that. And we'll go down here to one of our views, and we'll open up our, which one do I want? This one, all right. And we'll use another one of these new features in 2012, the Page Inspector. Page Inspector is kind of like that F12 experience in the browser, except in Visual Studio. Lets me mess with the actual file. So my boss wants it to be prettier. So I'm just going to use this to navigate around. Again, it doesn't work so well with low res, but I can go and navigate through, have it jump to, basically what's the background that's setting that? Well, it's over here. It's setting it to this background color. Let's change this to be a nice hokey dark orange. And save that. And let's just clean that up a bit. And we'll go back and we will check in these changes. And we will do and check in. All right, so I'm done with that work, which is great. Now I want to go back to my last work when I got interrupted. So I'll go back to my work, and I will just resume this work that was in progress. When I do that, hands off the keys here, it's going to put me back exactly where I was when I left off, right? The code's back. My files that I was working on at that time are back. My breakpoints are back. My state's all back. So that's what this gives you. Now, another cool feature that we put in is code review. So code review is just a way for letting, we all know what code review is. I want another dev to look at it. If you can do it while the guy's standing over your shoulder, it's great. It doesn't always work because the guy can't always come over your shoulder. Now we got stuff in Visual Studio to make that a little easier for that case. So I can go up here and request review for this change, and put in who I want it to be, and we'll put in my alter ego, Raleigh Hokey, and if I want to put any comment, and submit a request, and this will just send a code review request with emails and all that kind of stuff over to this Raleigh Hokey guy. Now Raleigh Hokey is running over here. So I just switched users now. Now I'm Raleigh Hokey, right? Raleigh Hokey is our dark theme guy. So our dark theme guy will see a code review in addition to the email notifications that he gets. And if he opens this, then he can see the code review, including the work item that this is supposed to solve. He can add other people to it if he wants it to, if they wants them to see it. He can see my comment. He can see the file that I was working on, including the diff as part of it, including the dark color scheme diff version. And he can come in and just put all kinds of comments, like right-click, add comment, missing something, and put that in, and just go through and kind of check off the files that he needs to review as part of it. And he can come back here and say, it needs work, for example, and send it back. And now, again, email notifications go back. I'm back here. I'm looking at the code review. I can see that Raleigh Hokey did something, but it wasn't too happy about it. I can come in and see the actual change that he's made as part of it. And then I can come in and reply and say nope, and check off his comments that I've looked at it, and go ahead and close the review if I want to. So it's just a kind of a tool. It's not enforced. It's not trying to make the devs go through it. We're trying to make the devs happier. It's just a tool if this makes their life better for code review for them to go use. One of the nice things about it now is if I go check this guy in, I can see that not only am I checking in his work item, my work items are already associated for me when I was using my work, which was nice, but I've also got the code review associated with it. So if I check in, turn off caps, then I've checked this guy in. But if I ever want to see what was going on, like if we go and look at, I don't know what I just did there. If If I go back and look at the history for this, we can see what we just implemented. I can open up the file, but in this case, what I actually wanted to do was open up the change set details. And not only is the work item there, but the code review is still there associated with it as well. And I can go back and see, like if something went wrong here as part of it, what went wrong. I can see the actual code review. I can see the actual comments that were there for the code review. So you have some level of traceability, which is nice. Another cool feature that we have, and I don't have time to show you the details of all of this, but if I go back to the builds page, you can see like all of these builds that have been triggered over the last 30 minutes here. These are all builds that were triggered when I did check-in. So I have a CI build set up, nothing special about that. But what's cool is these aren't just set up as CI builds. These are set up as continuous delivery builds to my Azure account. So if I go over to my Azure account, this is actually built in between Azure and TFS. We did the integration. I can see here that if we look at my websites, I've got 3. I can go into this catalog website, and I can see down here that it is actually connected to TFS. In fact, it knows that Cool Scrum V2 project is where this thing's coming from, and they're hooked up. I can go back and I can see in the deployment section all of the deployments that have happened for this website. And in fact, apparently the last one failed because I broke, something got broken. But all of these ones that have been happening over the last few minutes, as I've been doing the check, these all have been happening this hour. I have continuous delivery set up, and it took about, 90 seconds to get that set up to do that for this basic scenario. Now, the more advanced your app is, the more complicated it gets, but you kind of have it. And in fact, if everything worked right, then I should be able to go and look at the actual app here running on Azure, and it should be, what we set it to, dark orange. It should have a dark orange background at the top. And it has a dark orange background at the top. So that's kind of flowing through, which is nice. All right, 8 minutes. Time for one more feature before I wrap up and show you where all this stuff is. So this is another new one in Visual Studio. So let me go ahead and open another app. So we have these new tools in Visual Studio. Well, not new, but we've had these architecture tools in Visual Studio for you to use to go and explore your code. They were there designed for if you're trying to understand a code that you may not know, right? Help you just get a lay of the land, different architectural and diagramming tools. And they're really good and really powerful, but I know I've struggled a bit with trying to use them in my actual development. So they've actually put in a new change that makes them much more accessible as you're doing the actual development and much more practical to use. And I'm going to show you that real quick. So for this demo, I have a Tetris app here, an amazingly complicated app. And we're just going to play it real quick. And as I'm playing it because I've heard there's a problem with it. And we're just going to wait for something to go wrong. And, the thing that's going to go wrong is tied to a random number. So we're already getting close to a record here. Come on. This is again bad mojo. All right. Okay, excellent. So something's wrong with this app. I can't imagine what it is. So we have this null reference exception, a common problem. Now the problem is how you figure out what actually went wrong. How did this value end up as null? So figure is our actual value here that's null. So we are going to go on an expedition together to figure out what is wrong with this application. Now, I'm going to use this new feature called Code Map. And I'm going to right click, and I'm going to click Show on Code Map. And when I do that, I'm going to get a box on the right that says Draw Preview. Isn't that amazing? So, let's keep going. Now, okay, so figure is null. Figure is being passed into Draw Preview here. So the next question we should ask ourselves is who's calling Draw Preview? So we're going to go over here and we're going to say find all references. And only one method's calling it. How convenient. And we'll go into Preview Paint. And in Preview Paint, we can look in here and say, okay, well, it is in fact calling Draw Preview. And then the value that I'm looking for is coming from grid get next figure. right? So something's going wrong with get next figure. So we're going to add get next figure to our diagram and jump into get next figure. And inside of get next figure, we can basically see that this is a big switch statement that says, give me back, the left, right lines, all the different shapes. And, it's got 6 different cases and a default value of null. So somehow this thing is returning null. So I'm just going to keep track of that. I'm going to add a comment here and say this is returning, so I can remember what I'm doing. And now the question is, okay, how am I getting a null back? Well, I get a null back if next figure that I'm switching on isn't one of these main 6 cases. So now I'm wondering what's going on with next fig. So I'm going to add next figure to our code map. And again, low res, and let's just relay this out. So there's next figure. But now the question I'm having is, for next figure, what are the things that are actually populating it? So I'll find all references on that. And it's being populated by Tetris grid and init next figure. Okay? So Tetris grid is our initializer, and I'd be surprised if that's causing a problem. There it is. It's setting it to 0. 0 is one of our valid cases. That's fine. So I'm going to jump down to init next figure. Now, init next figure is calculating what the next figure should be by the random number. And this is that little random function that was causing me so much problems before. And it's trying to do a random number between 0 and num figs. So what's the range of the number that I'm getting back here is an interesting question. So let's go look at num figs. And in num figs, I can see that it's 7. Now, how many different types of figures was in get next figure? I can't remember, but it's right here on my map. So let's just jump back and check. So that's the nice thing about building up the map as I'm going along. It's easy to kind of build up a picture of the piece of code that I actually want to look at a given time and explore it. So you're right, there's 6. So now this is the problem. So I'm giving back a random number between 0 and 7. When it comes back too high, it's throwing. So either the range that I'm looking for is too wrong or I'm missing a shape. So the question is, how do I go about figuring that out? Well, let me start snooping at the shapes and look to see if I'm missing any shapes. So I'm going to come in here. So in get next figure, I'm just going to say, show me all of the methods this calls. So just auto-populate that for me. So that'll give me all the methods it calls, and including all of these constructors for the lines, and I don't know why they're called thunders, but whatever. All these different shapes. And if I just click through each of these, it's the constructor, and I see that I got a line deriving from figure, and a left thunder deriving from figure, and a right T deriving from figure. They all derive from figure. So let's go ahead and snoop around a little bit at that. So let's add figure to our diagram. And now it's starting to look really interesting. So let's lay this thing out one more time. And you can see I got next figure. It calls all of these. They all derive from figure. Now, if there was a missing shape, it probably derives from figure. So let me just go and snoop at that and ask it to show all of the types that are derived from figure and put that on there. And zoom that down. And you can see that I've got all the figures, and all of them called get next figure, except for this little square down here that's hanging off, right? Because it doesn't have the same connection, doesn't have the same shape. So now I can really see that this is a problem. I can flag it for follow-up. I can put a new comment in here. And again, the res is killing me. Forget something. And now I could go fix it myself now that I know what the problem is, but maybe this isn't my code. So I can share this. I could save this file and another dev could open it. I could email it. So let's go ahead and do that. I'll email it as an image. And now I got a little email, and I can put in here, this is the Tetris problem. And he can see what's going on with that. I can send it to somebody, sure, and send it off. And now I have a very confused friend in North Carolina. I'm kind of curious what kind of response I'm going to get back from that. So that's code map. So I'm almost out of time. I have 30 seconds. So we're going to go back to slides for our last slide. And this slide is... Okay, 2 slides, I lied. So release cadence. So how often do we normally release? Like what, every 18, 19 years? Something like that? I mean, that's what it feels like to me. I don't know what it feels like to you guys. But we're moving to a more frequent delivery cadence. So we do 3-week sprints now. 1 week after each sprint, we ship the results of that sprint to the hosted service. We also put out a CTP of Visual Studio on the on-premise TFS. And then every 3 months, we provide an official released quarterly update to Visual Studio and TFS. So basically every 3 months you're going to get something, and you'll get it more frequently on the quarterly update. And if you want to play around with some of the new stuff, you can. So that's the new cadence that we're going under. In that model, of all the things that I showed you, where they show up, Team Explorer, Diff Merge, My Work, Code Review, Local Workspaces, a bunch of that stuff is already in Visual Studio TFS 2012 RTM. The Git TF stuff that I showed you is open source, and by open source, I mean it in a good way. My team builds it, my team maintains it, my team supports it. But if you want to take it and get the code and put contributions to it, you're welcome to. It's up on Codeplex, and just go search for it. You'll find it. The cloud build stuff, the continuous deployment to Azure that I showed you for like 30 seconds, that's also available today only off of the hosted service. Like I said, we're going to have features that are going to show up on the hosted service first before they show up on the on-premise product. And then the 400 character path limit feature and code map are both coming. They're available. You can play with them today off of the Visual Studio CTPs that are available for 2012. But they'll show up in our first quarterly update, which I don't know if we've officially said when it's coming, but it's next month. So it'll be really soon. So that's the map of everything that we've got. And I am out of time, and I'm guessing there's probably some hungry people here. So I'm going to thank everybody. And then if you have any questions or any gripes, developer-related stuff, feel free to send it to me, and I'll hang around here if anybody has any questions. Thank you.